Hey guys, this is Rhythm Swagya, and it's been a while since I've posted anything on my YouTube channel. So, just to make up to that thing, I've come up with a very interesting video of creating your own custom React framework, to be honest. And I know, I had promised that I would be only making Python and Unix related videos in my YouTube channel, but promises are meant to be broken, and I have actually come up with this thing. And as I've gotten my hands dirty into this, I thought that why not just show it off to the world and see what happens. So let's just dig into this. So this is the structure that I'm following, and you can also follow the structure, or you can create the structure of your own for this project. And this is the package.json file, wherein what I'm doing is I'm actually listening to the index.html file, because what React actually does is actually does the same thing and actually listens on to the index.html file. And these are the two files wherein you will be putting in your most of your time. So in the index.html file, we would be writing out our components, and in the React file, we would be creating our own hooks and whatever logic this framework has. You can create your own React framework so that you can actually have your own logic built in there. Now that we have gotten this app component ready, we would want to see how we can actually render that app component. So for rendering out the app component, we would want to understand how actually React handles any of the components. So whenever we are actually writing out a component in the React, what we are doing is we are actually writing down this JSON, which is written when you are calling this component. So this JSON is nothing but the JSX that you are writing down, and it is converted into some sort of this JSON whenever you are writing some div element, whenever you are assigning some property to that element, and whenever you are having some children to that div. This is how it is actually structured, and this is what is called as a virtual DOM. And we would want to follow this structure only, and the children that a div element could have would also be a virtual DOM. So this is actually handling out the whole tree of the components that are being done. So we would want to follow the same structure over here, and for that we would be creating a function named createElement, and it would be doing the job for us. So for that, what we would want to do is we would want to take in the tag element, the properties to that element, and the children that are there to this particular element, and we would want to return those children out in this manner. And I'm structuring it in this way. You can also choose your own structure because it's your own framework, and you can actually return that create element out to be used it over here. And let's just write down something. Let's say we are writing down an h1 tag, and I don't want to assign any properties to it, and let's say I'm writing down my name because why not. So now that you have gotten your JSX ready, now what you would want to do is we would want to mount this app component, because this is our main component. We would want to mount this app component, and we would want to render this component. For that, we would want to write in the mount function, which will handle all of this. And what this mount component would be doing is taking up the app component, and for generic purpose, we would be naming this as VD, because VD is a virtual DOM, and what we are doing is actually getting that only. And let's say I've declared a global function, variable over here to use this VD throughout this framework. Let's say I name it VD func to be used throughout the framework, and I just name it VD func, and I'm just setting the value to VD that we are getting from the import. Now what we would want to do is we would want to actually render this VD func over here. So for that, we are actually creating this function named render app. This render app function is actually responsible for rendering any of the elements or any of the VD func or any of the virtual DOM that are there. So how the rendering stuff works is that whenever you are calling this function, which is calling the app function, you are actually generating a capture. The number of times you are calling the app function, you are generating new captures that are there. So whenever you are calling this, once the capture is generated, you would want to render that capture out. And whenever there is change in the capture, because just to render stuff out efficiently, we would want to see what is the change between the previous capture and the capture that is coming up, so that we can actually efficiently manipulate the actual DOM and present it into the browser. This is actually optimized way of actually rendering stuff out. So we would also be doing the same thing. Let's create a previous capture. Let's say I would be calling it the previous virtual DOM, and let's say I am getting the new virtual DOM from this vdfunc. Now what I would want to do is I would want to call this function, and this does the job of handling the new virtual DOM, the old virtual DOM, and spitting the HTML out into this root element. So I don't want to go into the details of this function. I will be attaching this function in detail into the description for you to understand it, but this is currently beyond the scope of this video of how this is being handled. You can create your own logic of doing this as well, but this is beyond the scope of this video, so I'll be attaching it to the description. So what it expects is the root element, which is the index.html element as I mentioned, and I would want to fetch it using this query. So now that we have gotten this root element, we would want to pass in to this function, and we would want to pass in the new virtual DOM and the virtual DOM which is already the previous virtual DOM. So now that we have actually called this function, this has handled checking the difference between the previous frame and the current frame, and rendering that out and converting this to an actual HTML and rendering it out into the root element. And once this is done, we would want to actually set the previous frame to the current new frame that is there for the next cycle to come up. And we would want to call this function in the mount, and we would want to return this mount function so that it can be used over here. And we would want to register the app component over here. So now as our app component is registered, and we would want to return on the server to use it. And now that we have turned on the server, what we would see is the tag that we have created. So I can see the server running. So whenever I reload the page, you can see my name coming up over here. So Rhythm Suhagya is coming up nicely. And now let's say if I change something into this, you can see the change happening over here as well. Because it is real time, parcel library actually real times listen to the index.html file, and every time there is a change in the index.html, it just renders those things out. So yeah, you have actually created your working React. So now we would want to implement the two most famous hooks in the React, which is the useState and the useEffect. So first we would be creating a useState function. So what a useState function would be doing is taking in an initial value, and what we would want to do is we would want to set that initial value to the current value, and this current value can be the updated value or the initial value. So for getting the updated value, we would want to maintain some array for that, and let's say we name that array to h, and to uniquely identify this useEffect, let's use some index for that, which would be 0 by default, and let's get the current value from this thing. So now that we have gotten the current value, we would want to create a setState function as well for this. setState, and setState function would be responsible for updating the value in the array, and it would be updating it to whatever it is being sent, and we would want to return this current value and setState. So there are a few things to it. Currently we cannot use the IDX directly because it is a global variable, and it will be updated in the framework anywhere. So we don't want to actually affect our useEffect for this. So we would be freezing that current IDX to the current IDX, and we will be using this in the local scope. So now I'd be using this, and while using useState, you would have understood that whenever you are setting some state, you are actually rendering that thing out again to actually see the effect in place. So for that, I'd be rendering my app again, and while rendering my app, whenever the next time the app is being rendered, useState will be called again, and this next time it would be able to fetch the value from the current IDX. And so for that, while I'm rendering out my page again, I would want to set the IDX again to 0, and to uniquely identify this useState such that the index does not actually come up again, I would want to increment the counter by 1, and now I would want to return this use state from here. Once this is done, I would want to use my use state over here, and let's create a counter for actually seeing this in action. Let's just remove my name and write in some counter, and for that I'll be writing some more JSX over here, button, naming it button again. And now I can use the properties in the button. Let's say I would want to use the on click method over here to actually increment the counter. So set counter would be count plus 1. Okay, 1. So now you can see that this is the h1 tag and this is the button tag. And let me just confirm all of the things that are right and go to the page, and you can see the number and the button, and whenever I'm clicking on the button you can see the number getting incremented by 1. So on the similar lines, we can also create a use effect function or hook. It would also be taking 2 arguments. First is the callback, as you all know, and the second is a list of dependencies. And currently we would want to get the old dependencies from the H array again, because H array would be storing every state value in it uniquely. So we would follow the same logic over here. We would want to write the current IDX and get the value. We want to freeze the current IDX and get the value from here. And as you have known use effect, if whenever the first time the component is being rendered, you would want to run the callback, or whenever there is some change between the new dependencies against the old dependencies, you would want to again run the effect. So here is how I actually written the logic over here. Okay, so this is throwing me some error. Okay, so this is how it is actually handled, and just after using the use effect, we would want to increment the counter again to use it again. So this is how I've actually come up with the use effect. I would want to uncomment this, we would want to return this, we would want to use the use effect over here, and now I can use my use effect. I hope this is making sense to you guys. And currently I'm using my dependencies as a counter, and I would want to console log any of the counter changes with my name again, with the first name. So now if I open my console, you can see my name and the counter over here, and whenever I'm incrementing the value, you can see the counter working properly and the use effect running again and again whenever there is a change in the dependencies. So this is how you can actually create your own use state, use effect, and your own React. So I thought, I hope that this video was informative for you guys, and it actually inspired you to actually create your own React framework or any framework of any kind. It was quite simple for us to actually do the stuff out, but React has much and lot more things other than this to actually provide it to us, and this is just a small piece of that. I would want to show you a website which I've created using this. So just give it some moment. So yeah, so this is something that I've created using this framework, and this is just a smaller part of the framework that I've created. There is a much complex version of this that I've pushed it on my Git repo, and I'll be attaching it in the description. So you can also create something like this using the framework, and this is just an example of how it can be done properly. So I think this video was informative to you guys, and thank you for watching.